Now, I want to just very briefly share some information with you to make the invisible visible about the practices of animal agricultural practices here in the Netherlands. And I'm going to let Karen explain some of this. She's the expert. Okay.
Oké, alle foto's zijn van Wakker Dier en van Jan van Eycken. Oké, hier mag ik zeggen bovenin.
Op deze foto zie je een kip die ontwekt wordt. Dat zie je op die foto. Dus dat gebeurt eigenlijk standaard in de industrie van zowel de eiindustrie als de kipindustrie. Dat de bekken van de kippen worden afgesneden en soms wordt dan ook een gedeelte van de zenuwen geraakt in de snavel, wat dan eigenlijk gewoon heel gevoelig is. Maar het gebeurt om ervoor te zorgen dat de kip elkaar dan niet pikken uit angst en uit stress.
Nou, hier zie je de melkindustrie. Het zijn echt rottige beelden voor jullie, ik weet niet waar ze allemaal vandaan hebben gehaald. Misschien maar gewoon de volgende pagina. In ieder geval, het gaat erover dat koeien natuurlijk hartstikke oud kunnen worden, maar zodra de melkproductie dus een voldoende melk hebben gegeven in die zin dat het niet meer wordt, maar alleen maar minder, dan houdt het gewoon op. Het onverdoofd castreren van biggen, dat zie je daar rechts. De lange afstandstransporten, dat is natuurlijk ook nog steeds een grote ramp. Dieren worden door heel Nederland en ver daarbuiten gebracht, omdat daar het slachten net wat goedkoper is. Boven hoe dieren in de bio-industrie worden gehouden. Dus ook een foto van Jan van Eycken op de kale vloer, zonder stro, zonder speelgoed, zonder ook maar iets. En hier zitten nog ramen in, dat is eigenlijk ook nog wat. Nou, dit is gekweekte vis. En het probleem daarbij is dat er heel veel antibiotica gebruikt wordt. En tegelijkertijd wordt er onderzoek gedaan naar hoe dicht moet je die vissen nou bij elkaar houden. Als bijvoorbeeld roofvissen zijn, dan is het handig om ze heel dicht bij elkaar te houden. Want ze vreten elkaar natuurlijk op, ze vechten elkaar letterlijk de tent uit. En wat doen ze dan? Dan onderzoeken ze hoe dicht de vis bij elkaar moet zijn om te denken als hij een staart ziet dat het zijn eigen staart is en niet van een andere vis. Grote ellende dus eigenlijk ook.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. I could never have explained it quite that well, not in Dutch anyway. And my goal here is simply to make the invisible visible so that we can appreciate the psychology of eating animals and why the system works so hard to keep this, the invisible victims of carnism out of sight and therefore out of consciousness. But as I mentioned, animals are obviously the most direct victims, and the animals pay dearly for our carnism, but they're not the only victims of the system. Another set of victims are the meat packers and slaughterhouse workers who have to work in a death-saturated, highly dangerous environment, and not surprisingly have been found to have high rates of post-traumatic stress and addictions. Our environment, as many of you know, is an invisible victim of carnism. The United Nations considers animal agriculture one of the most serious contributors to the most serious environmental problems facing the world today. And we are the invisible victims of carnism. We pay for our carnism with our health, as eating animals has been linked with the leading diseases in the Western world. And we also pay for our carnism with our hearts and with our minds. Because to eat the body of another sentient being, we have to block our awareness and shut down our empathy. So we pay for our carnism with the gap in our consciousness. Now, I've just been discussing denial expressed through invisibility, which is the primary defense of the system. But if you think about it, I mean, does invisibility alone seem like enough to maintain the entire system to you? No, of course not. I mean, hints of the truth surround us, including a vast array of dead animals everywhere we turn in the form of meat. So when invisibility inevitably falters, we must be able to justify eating animals. And the way that we learn to justify eating animals is by learning to believe that the myths of meat, eggs, and dairy are the facts of meat, eggs, and dairy. Now, there's a vast mythology surrounding eating animals, but all of these myths fall under what I refer to as the 3 N's of justification. If you had to guess what these are, what do you think they would be? Eating meat, eggs, and dairy is Well, it has to start with an N. But there is an N that's related to that. Yes, you got it. Well, yeah, people always say nutritious, but I put that under necessary. But we'll come back to that. And I love doing this exercise. I've been giving my Carnism presentation internationally for a couple of years now. I've done this exercise with thousands of people, and I am always fascinated at how quickly people guess these answers. Eating animals is normal, natural, and necessary. And we get these answers so quickly because we've heard this all before. I mean, these very same arguments have been used to justify violent practices throughout human history. Now, let's just briefly look at these myths, each of these in turn. Okay, eating meat is normal. Well, what we call normal is really just the beliefs and behaviors of the dominant culture. It is the carnistic norm. And carnism as a social norm is so entrenched that it's virtually impossible to see unless we step outside the carnistic box. So to help you step outside the box, I want to do another quick exercise with you. I'd like you to imagine that you're back at that party and you're, sorry to do this again, and your host has just told you that you're eating a golden retriever. But this time, imagine that you tell your host how you feel. And she replies by saying, don't worry, don't feel bad. The dog had a good life. She was able to run and play, and she even formed friendships with some other golden retrievers and some people before she was killed at 6 months old. Does it feel any easier to eat the golden retriever? No, I had one woman in Colorado say, well, no, her friends miss her. I feel bad. So ask yourself, if you would be opposed to a perfectly healthy golden retriever being killed simply because people like the way her thighs taste, why might you not be opposed to the exact same thing being done to somebody else? Carnism as a social norm is so entrenched that it blinds us to the fact that organic meat, in the United States we say humane meat, is a complete contradiction in terms. Organic or humane meat is a myth. It's a myth constructed by those in the business of violence to appeal to those of us who would ordinarily never support such violence. Okay, eating meat is natural. Well, what we call natural is really just the dominant culture's interpretation of history. It refers not to human history, but to carnistic history. It references not our fruit-eating ancestors, but their flesh-eating descendants. In other words, through carnism, we only look as far back in history as we need to justify current carnistic practices. And to be fair, you know, murder, rape, and infanticide are arguably as old, as long-standing, and therefore as natural as eating animals. And yet we do not invoke the longevity of these practices as a justification for them today. In the words of author Colleen Patrick Goudreau, do we really want to use the behavior of the Neanderthals as the yardstick by which to measure current moral choices? And finally, eating meat is necessary. Well, what we call necessary is simply what's necessary to maintain the dominant culture, to maintain the carnistic status quo. And here, I'm just going to let a picture speak for itself. Can you see in the back? Are the words large enough? Yeah. This is the number of animals killed since opening this slide. Now, a related myth a lot of you were talking about, you said eating meat is nutritious. This is often expressed through the common protein myth. Where do you get your protein if you don't eat animals? But did you know that you could be strong enough to lift a car without having eaten an ounce of animal protein in your life? I'm not making this up, and I'm not crazy. You know, looking back on my own resistance to witnessing the truth about eating animals, I could see how the myths had a tremendous influence on me, as they do on all of us. I mean, I couldn't close that gap in my consciousness until I was ready to make the behavioral change that would inevitably follow. And I couldn't make that change until I felt safe enough to do so. I had a lot of fears and concerns. Would I get sick? Would I go broke buying expensive vegan foods? Would I have to subsist on a diet of tofu and cardboard? And what about my relationships? My father was, he is today, a charter captain, it's a professional fisherman. My uncle has been an avid hunter his entire life. My Jewish stepmother made the best matzo ball soup, it's a chicken soup, this side of the equator. My Italian nana thrived on stuffing us full of her lasagna marinara. And my half-Lebanese mother served an Arabic lamb dish as the centerpiece for every special occasion. So what would happen if I rejected the traditions that bonded me to my family? Now, what I didn't realize back then was that, although change is always somewhat scary, and changing ingrained behaviors is always somewhat challenging, that this kind of change would also be tremendously empowering. I didn't realize that many of my fears were unfounded, that I would be healthier today at 46 than I was when I was 23, when I was half my age. Or that I would be able to cook and eat, thank you. I would be able to cook and eat even more abundantly. And I didn't realize that the deepest bonds with others are forged not through unquestioningly following the dictates of tradition, but by becoming the kind of person who practices authenticity and integrity, the cornerstones of meaningful relationships. And yet the myths of meat prevail, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. And these myths prevail largely because the system is so institutionalized. It's embraced and maintained by all major social institutions. It's become self-perpetuating. And when we are born into an institutionalized system such as Carnism, we inevitably internalize that system. In other words, we learn to look at the world through the lens of Carnism. And Carnism uses a set of defenses that distort our perceptions of meat, eggs, and dairy and the animals we eat so that we can feel comfortable enough to consume them. For instance, Carnism teaches us to see animals as objects. So we learn to refer to this turkey as something rather than someone. Or we call this little baby an it, a thing, rather than he or she. Carnism teaches us to see animals as abstractions, as lacking in any individuality or personality of their own. A pig is a pig, and all pigs are the same. And like other victims of violent ideologies, we give them numbers rather than names. For instance, a meat cutter I interviewed for my doctoral dissertation said to me, "I don't think of farmed animals as individuals. I wouldn't be able to do my job if I got that personal with them." When you say individuals, you mean as a unique person, as a unique thing with its own name and its own characteristics, its own little games that it plays? Yeah? Yeah, I'd really rather not know that. I'm sure it has it, but I'd rather not know it. And Carnism teaches us to place animals in rigid categories in our minds so that we can harbor very different feelings and carry out very different behaviors toward different species. For instance, a female meat eater I interviewed told me that she regularly consumes a variety of types of meats. And then when I asked her if she ate veal, she got very quiet and she looked at me with this shocked expression on her face. And this is what she answered. "Well, let's just say I came to your house and you told me that I had just eaten veal. I'd probably vomit. Like, I have to get that out of my system." And when I asked her why, she said, "Because veal comes from a baby. I can't eat a baby." And when we look at the world through the lens of Carnism, we fail to see the absurdities of the system. So we see images like this or like this, somebody mutilating their own body to be eaten, and we take no notice rather than take offense. Or we see images like this or this, and we laugh rather than cry. Voltaire was right. If we believe absurdities, we shall commit atrocities. And Carnism is but one of the many atrocities, one of the many violent ideologies. Oh, what's atrocities? Thank you. Mass trauma, mass traumatization. Thank you for asking that. I would have not explained it. So if we believe absurdities, we shall commit atrocities. Atrocities are, Carnism is but one of the many atrocities, one of the many violent ideologies that are an unfortunate part of the human legacy. And although the experience of each set of victims will always be somewhat unique, the ideologies themselves are structurally similar because the mentality that enables such violence is the same. It's the mentality of domination and subjugation, of privilege and oppression. It's the mentality that causes us to turn someone into something, to reduce a life to a unit of production, to erase someone's being. It is the might makes right mentality that makes us feel entitled to wield complete control over the lives and deaths of those with less power, just because we can. And to feel justified in our actions because they're only savages, women, animals. It is the mentality of meat. And so if we fail to pick out the common threads that are woven through all violent ideologies, then we will be doomed to recreate atrocities in new forms. And this is why it is essential that we incorporate all oppressive systems into our analysis, including Carnism. Eating animals is not simply a matter of personal ethics. It is the inevitable end result of a deeply entrenched oppressivism. Eating animals is a social justice issue. So now that we've talked a little bit about, or more than a little bit, about the problem that is Carnism, this brings us to the final part of this presentation. What do we do about it? What is the solution to the gap? I want to address this question with another question for you. What do you think is the reason that we use carnistic defenses in the first place? Why deny, justify, objectify, turn others into abstractions?
So you don't have to change?
Yes, partly. But why not? But why not just say, I don't want to change and not use your, it prevents us from changing. You're absolutely right. Why not just be direct about it? The answer is because we care. We care about animals, and we care about the truth. And Carnism depends on our not caring, and the system is built on deception. I have been talking about this issue of eating animals now for about 20 years, and I almost never encounter a person who doesn't cringe when faced with images of animals suffering. Why else would we need to go through all the psychological acrobatics if not because we care? And so our caring is both the problem and the solution. Our caring is what makes us want to turn away from the truth. But our caring is also what gives us the courage to see the truth, to face the truth. The courage to bear witness. When we bear witness, we identify with another. We see something of them in ourselves and something of ourselves in them, even if the only thing we identify with is the desire not to suffer. When we bear witness, we empathize with another. We look at the world through their eyes so that when we make choices that impact them, we ask ourselves, what would he or she ask us to do? When we bear witness, we make the connection. We close the gap in our consciousness, and we become more empowered because we become more psychologically integrated. We're more in alignment with our core values, values such as compassion, reciprocity, the golden rule, and justice, values that are diametrically opposed to Carnism. So we're better able to practice integrity, which is the integration of values and practices. And I mean, witnessing can take so many forms, so many forms. Just think of the fall of the Berlin Wall, the demonstrations in Tahrir Square, the revolutionary music of the 60s. Witnessing can be writing or not writing a check in the name of justice. It can be standing on a street corner, handing out pamphlets, starting a task force. Witnessing can be hosting or attending or presenting a lecture. You know, if you think about it, throughout the history of humankind, virtually every atrocity was made possible because the populace turned away from a reality that they felt was too painful to face. And virtually every revolution, every social transformation was made possible because a group of people chose to bear witness. And they demanded that others bear witness as well. I mean, just consider the countless witnesses, the unsung heroes throughout history. Some who have been famous, but most who have been the unsung heroes of social transformation. This transformative potential of collective witnessing is why oppressive systems must deny the truth about the social movements that challenge them. So, despite what mainstream carnistic culture would have us believe, there is in fact reason to be very, very hopeful. Consciousness about the issue of eating animals is raising. It's higher than it's ever been before, thanks to conferences and programs like this and lots of things that are happening around the world. The vegan movement itself, the counterpoint to Carnism, is in fact thriving. For instance, in the United States, the number of vegetarians and vegans has actually doubled in the past 3 years. This is a trend that's happening around the world in many places. More and more leaders and celebrities are saying no to Carnism. Ellen DeGeneres even has her own website dedicated entirely to going vegan. We've got vegan cookbooks and innovative foods and restaurants. They're popping up everywhere. The movement and consciousness is growing and thriving. Okay, so coming full circle back to the 1970s. Fritz, my first dog, was in many ways also my first teacher. Fritz taught me that love, which is the highest form of connection and the highest expression of justice, shouldn't be limited by arbitrary boundaries such as species. To love someone is to respect their being. It's to respect that no matter how different from us they are, they have a life that matters to them. So Fritz taught me to be a witness. He taught me that love is a verb. And this is why the goal of my talk today, the goal of my life's work, has been to raise awareness of the violent system that is Carnism. Because for better or worse, we are all participants in the system. So our choice really isn't whether we participate, but how we participate. And with awareness, we can choose to be active witnesses rather than passive bystanders. With awareness, we can lead more authentic and freely chosen lives. And we can, as Gandhi said, then truly become the change that we wish to see. Thank you.